Years ago, the Lord sent Jeremiah with a message about a promise for the people of Israel. Then, in the first year that Cyrus was king of Persia, the Lord kept his promise by telling Cyrus to send this official message to all parts of his kingdom. I am King Cyrus of Persia. The Lord God of heaven, who is also the God of Israel, has made me the ruler of all nations on earth. And he has chosen me to build a temple for him in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. The Lord God will watch over and encourage any of his people who want to go back to Jerusalem and help build the temple. Everyone else must provide what is needed. They must give money, supplies, and animals, as well as gifts for rebuilding God's temple. Many people felt that the Lord God wanted them to help rebuild his temple, and they made plans to go to Jerusalem. Among them were priests, Levites, and leaders of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. The others helped by giving silver articles, gold, personal possessions, cattle, and other valuable gifts, as well as offerings for the temple. King Cyrus gave back the things that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the Lord's temple in Jerusalem and had put in the temple of his own gods. Cyrus placed Mithridath, his chief treasurer, in charge of these things. Mithridath counted them and gave a list to Sheshbazzar, the governor of Judah. Included among them were large gold dishes, large silver dishes, other dishes, gold bowls, silver bowls, and other articles. Altogether there were gold and silver dishes, bowls, and other articles. Sheshbazzar took them with him when he and the others returned to Jerusalem from Babylonia. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia had captured many of the people of Judah and had taken them as prisoners to Babylonia. Now they were on their way back to Jerusalem and to their own towns everywhere in Judah. Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Reelaiah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mizpar, Bigvai, Rehum, and Baanah were in charge of the ones who were coming back. And here is a list of how many returned from each family group: from Parash, from Shephatiah, from Ara, descendants of Jeshua and Joab from Pahath Moab, from Elam, from Zatu, from Zakkai, from Bani, from Bebai, from Asgad, from Adonikam, from Bigvai, from Adin, from Ater, also known as Hezekiah, from Bazai, from Yorah, from Hazhum, and from Gibbar. Here is how many people returned whose ancestors had come from the following towns: from Bethlehem, from Netopha, from Anathoth, from Asmaveth, from Kiriathaim, Kephirah, and Beeroth, from Ramah and Geba, from Michmas, from Bethel and Ai, from Nebo, from Magbish, from the other Elam, from Haram, from Lod, Hadid, and Ono, from Jericho, and from Sina. Here is a list of how many returned from each family of priests: descendants of Jeshua from the family of Jediah, from the family of Immer, from the family of Pashur, and from the family of Haram. And here is a list of how many returned from the families of Levites, descendants of Hodaviah from the families of Jeshua and Kadmiel, descendants of Asaph from the temple musicians, and descendants of Shallum, Ater, Talmon, Akub, Hadattah, and Shobai from the temple guards. Here is a list of the families of temple workers whose descendants returned: Ziha, Hasupha, Tabath, Kuros, Siaha, Paddan, Libana, Hagabah, Akub, Hagab, Shamlai, Hanan, Giddel, Gahar, Ria, Rezin, Nekoda, Gazam, Uzzah, Paseah, Bisay, Asna, Munim, Nephizim, Bakbuk, Akufa, Harhur, Bazluth, Mahida, Harsha, Barkos, Sisera, Tema, Neziah, and Hatapha. Here is a list of Solomon's servants whose descendants returned: Sotai, Hassaphareth, Peruda, Jala, Darkon, Giddel, Shephatiah, Hattil, Pachrath-Hazzabaim, and Ami. A total of descendants of temple workers and of Solomon's servants returned. There were who returned from the families of Deliah, Tobiah, and Nekoda, though they could not prove that they were Israelites. They had lived in the Babylonian towns of Tel-Melah, Tel-Harsha, Cherub, Adon, and Immer. The families of Habiah, Hakaz, and Barzillai could not prove that they were priests. The ancestor of the family of Barzillai had married the daughter of Barzillai from Gilead and had taken his wife's family name. But the records of these three families could not be found, and none of them were allowed to serve as priests. In fact, the governor told them, "You cannot eat the food offered to God until we find out if you really are priests." There were who returned, in addition to servants and musicians, both women and men. They brought with them horses, mules, camels, and donkeys. When the people came to where the Lord's temple had been in Jerusalem, some of the family leaders gave gifts so it could be rebuilt in the same place. They gave all they could, and it came to a total of kilograms of gold, kilograms of silver, and robes for the priests. Everyone returned to the towns from which their families had come, including the priests, the Levites, the musicians, the temple guards, and the workers. During the 7th month of the year, the Israelites who had settled in their towns went to Jerusalem. The priest Joshua son of Jozadak, together with the other priests, and Zerubbabel son of Shealtiel and his relatives rebuilt the altar of Israel's God. Then they were able to offer sacrifices there by following the instructions God had given to Moses, the man of God. And they built the altar where it had stood before, even though they were afraid of the people who were already living around there. Then every morning and evening they burned sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. The people followed the rules for celebrating the Festival of Shelters and offered the proper sacrifices each day. They offered sacrifices to please the Lord, sacrifices at each new moon festival, and sacrifices at the rest of the Lord's festivals. Every offering the people had brought voluntarily was also presented to the Lord. Although work on the temple itself had not yet begun, the people started offering sacrifices on the Lord's altar on the first day of the 7th month of that year. King Cyrus of Persia had said the Israelites could have cedar trees brought from Lebanon to Joppa by sea. Builders had finished laying the foundation of the temple. The priests put on their robes and blew trumpets in honor of the Lord, while the Levites from the family of Asaph praised God with cymbals, the instructions given years before by King David. They praised the Lord and gave thanks as they took turns singing, "The Lord is good. His faithful love for Israel will last forever." Everyone started shouting and praising the Lord because work on the foundation of the temple had begun. Many of the older priests and Levites and the heads of families wept bitterly because they remembered seeing the first temple years before. But others were so happy that they celebrated with joyful shouts. Their shouting and crying were so noisy that it all sounded alike and could be heard a long way off. The enemies of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin heard that the people had come back to rebuild the temple of the Lord God of Israel. So they went to Zerubbabel and to the family leaders and said, "Let us help. Ever since King Esarhaddon of Assyria brought us here, we have worshipped your God and offered sacrifices to him." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the family leaders answered, "You cannot take part in building a temple for the Lord our God. We will build it ourselves, just as King Cyrus of Persia commanded us." Then the neighboring people began to do everything possible to frighten the Jews and to make them stop building. During the time that Cyrus was king, and even until Darius became king, they kept bribing government officials to slow down the work. The first year that Xerxes was king, the neighboring people brought written charges against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. Later, Bishlam, Mithredath, Tabeel, and their advisors got together and wrote a letter to Artaxerxes when he was king of Persia. It was written in Aramaic and had to be translated. A letter was also written to Artaxerxes about Jerusalem by Governor Rehum, Secretary Shimshai, and their advisors, including the judges, the governors, the officials, and the local leaders. They were joined in writing this letter by people from Erech and Babylonia, the Elamites from Susa, and people from other foreign nations that the great and famous Ashurbanipal had forced to settle in Samaria and other parts of western province. This letter said, "Your Majesty King Artaxerxes, we are your servants from everywhere in Western Province, and we send you our greetings. You should know that the Jews who left your country have moved back to Jerusalem, and are now rebuilding that rebellious city. In fact, they have almost finished rebuilding the walls and repairing the foundations. You should also know that if the walls are completed and the city is rebuilt, the Jews won't pay any kind of taxes, and there will be less money in your treasury.